There was a young lady when we were doing a operation targeting street level prostitution. There was a young lady that we encountered, and I was the undercover officer that day that picked her up, and she did solicit, and she was placed under arrest. And I remember her and I kind of butting heads a little bit, and she was out of place. This was her first prostitution-related charge, and I kind of gave her the what fors about, what are you doing down here? What are you expecting to happen down here? What are you involved in? How did you end up here? Why are we here today together? And she was pretty defensive, and she was less than cooperative, and I remember that very clearly. And I thought to myself, this is a girl that doesn't belong here. This is a girl that shouldn't be down here, and this is a girl that I'm worried about being able to survive in this environment. And about 4 years ago, she was murdered, and her body was dumped on McMicken. McMicken Avenue is one of our primary tracks here in the city of Cincinnati for prostitution, street-level prostitution. The night she was murdered and dumped in the middle of the street, the following day, the newly appointed captain for District 1, Captain John, had a town hall meeting with the community of Over the Rhine and West McMicken Neighborhood Association. Everybody was up in arms about the murder of a prostitute, and he was really taken back by that. And so he made his notes, he listened to what they had to say, and he came back to the district, and we had a brief little meeting, and he told me about this. And we floated some ideas back and forth, and he educated me a little bit about some of the stuff he had learned, and I gave him some information that I had about prostitution. He knew my background from Vice. At that time I was back in uniform, and we formulated this plan to target the street level prostitution on McMicken. And that's what we thought we were getting into, street level prostitution. So as I partnered up with a young lady named Katie Warner, who's a police officer in the police department, her specialty is problem solving. And what she's able to do is take a particular neighborhood or street segment and really pull apart all the layers of it and identify how this activity lives here. Why does prostitution thrive on McMicken? It's no different as just a general overview of any other street in the city of Cincinnati. It has sidewalks, it has residents, it has businesses, it has grass. It looks like any other street. Why is it here? 80% of the sidewalk along McMicken was unguarded, either 24 hours a day or certain segments in the day. The houses were unguarded from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. The businesses' sidewalk were unguarded from 5 p.m. till 8 a.m. the next morning, and there were vacant lots that were never guarded. So that was one of the elements where we kind of figured that there wasn't a whole lot of ownership of the sidewalk to say, hey, your activity and you aren't welcome here in front of my home or my business, you need to move along. So that was one of the things that she was able to do. What really jumped out, and it's in the ugliest form it could be, was human trafficking. It's here. This is human trafficking right here along this stretch. That's why this can exist, because there are victims here being made to perform sex acts for money by other people, whether it's a John, whether it's a low-level pimp, or whether it's a highly organized crime effort. It's happening right here. That was really the police department's first full effort in saying we have a human trafficking issue, acknowledging that, and moving forward in an investigation titled Human Trafficking. Well, how we hear about human trafficking cases is it comes from a multitude of avenues. We have a hotline for the Cincinnati Police Department where if you call, it rings in our office over here, and we answer it. If we don't answer it, there's a message that says we'll return your call as soon as possible. We get tips from Polaris, we get tips from the Salvation Army, and when we're picking up girls or we go out and we do some outreach work, we get tips from some of the girls. Believe it or not, sometimes John's calling and they say, you know, this girl that I've been seeing for several years, things are changing with her. She's got burn marks on her. She's saying that, you know, her boyfriend is abusing her. And so they come in all different forms and fashions and through all different mechanisms. There's no right or wrong way to get us the information. We just ask that you get us the information and let us work on it. When someone calls in with a complaint or with a tip, there's an expectation that there's going to be some immediate resolution, and it's very hard to do that with these type of cases. My boss and I, we talk about all the time how whether or not we believe it to be a human trafficking case, if it's brought to us in that manner, then we take that case from the beginning to the point where we say it's not human trafficking, and then we move in a different direction with that investigation, or it is human trafficking, then we have to fast forward even more with continuing in a human trafficking style investigation. So there's a whole lot of steps that go in there. They're very minute. Some of them are tedious. Some of them I'm not privileged to share with you, but it really involves uncovering the person who called, the person who's supposed to be the victim, and the suspects in the human trafficking, and then kind of getting an overall grasp of who's who and who's doing what, and then there's mechanisms that we use to move forward. So the more when reporting a tip to the Cincinnati Police Department or any entity that is going to investigate human trafficking or forward human trafficking information to a law enforcement agency, as thorough as the call taker can be in receiving information and trying to get as much information as possible. Any information about relatives, phone numbers, old addresses, current addresses, things like that, and then the victim, that comes on the victim side. The perpetrator, everything you know about this person, even if it's just a tattoo or a local drinkery that they hang out at, or a car that they drive, a color of a car, a style, anything like that helps, because the Vice unit, we just collect so much information, and it's very tedious, and put it on a computer, and we spend hours upon hours inputting this information. But once or twice a year, when we say we have a gentleman that's creating some havoc for us, driving a black Dodge Magnum, and that's all we know, we can get in our database, search that, and then we start pulling out some information, and it's been useful in the past, and putting our hands on someone that needs to be taken to jail. So victim services and the protection of victims is probably one of the first things that we talk about as a unit when we get a complaint. We will reach out to the Salvation Army and several other agencies and ask them if they know this person and if they're currently working with them. If they're not working with them, one of the first conversations that we have with a victim is asking them if they're willing to talk to some service providers. And that, and we go from clothing to housing and anything in between. And we really steer the victims in getting connected with services. We know that, again, the number one thing that the police department cares about and focuses on when we're talking about human trafficking victims is how do we protect them from the perpetrators of human trafficking. And that can be a John, and that can be a pimp. And so there are many ways that we go about that, but the number one thing is just to get them somewhere where they feel safe. And a lot of times we can't physically take a person who doesn't want to leave 1, 2, 3, 4 Vine Street and make them go stay somewhere where we know they're going to be safe. The best we can do is give them a plan, talk about what's your plan if somebody shows up, what's your plan if you need this, what's your plan if this is going to happen, and try to get them thinking in the mindset of the street isn't the answer. You've got phone numbers and agencies and people that can come and help you. Use that as your first step, and we'll get there quickly and help them. And it's not always putting them in a super secret house, but those type of things certainly are available. I think what the general public needs to know about human trafficking is that one of the things that kind of gets under my skin just a little bit is when we talk about this being the oldest profession in the world. And I say that's BS. The oldest profession in the world is war. And look at the things that we've done to minimize or reduce the possibility of war with negotiations and treaties and all things like that. And up until recent times, prostitution was almost because it was a male-driven society. I think that was our crutch, or our out, that it's the oldest profession in the world, because I think a lot of the male population didn't want it to go away. And so now I think that we're moving forward and we're growing as a society, and we're understanding really the victimization of this. It's just not the singular person that is the prostitute, but there's family members involved, there's children involved. And we haven't even touched about human trafficking in juveniles, which is another whole issue in itself. I think we're growing as a society, and we're realizing that every single prostitute that engages in this activity is a victim. and they are a victim of trafficking. And some of them are trafficking themselves, and some of them are being trafficked by a low-level pimp, and some of them are being trafficked by organized crime. The thing that the general public needs to know, that this is someone's daughter, almost inevitably someone's parent. They're a sister, they're an aunt. Someone in this world brought them in this world, and someone in this world loves them and needs that person back that was lost when they started engaging in prostitution and became a victim of trafficking. So as the public looks at this person, let's quit looking at this person as someone that is dirty or someone that's a criminal, but let's look at them as someone that is a victim, and given the opportunity and the right circumstances with the right support system and the right people there for them to fall to, because they are going to fall, that these people can reclaim themselves and be the persons that they want to be, most importantly, and probably be a pretty daggone productive member of society. So when we look at prostitution, let's not look at someone in a negative light. Let's look at someone that as a society we should be looking to prop up, be a crutch for them, and help them get back to being what they want to be and what they thought they were going to be when they were 12, 13, and 14 years old. If the society just took a helping approach to this particular issue, I think we could really make a lot of headway in reclaiming a bunch of people that can come here and help us be great and help society be great. Below 10 years old. So, that's what we deal with. Not a whole lot you can say about that. There's too much of that going on. There's too many child predators out there, and there's too much child trafficking happening, not just in Cincinnati, but across the globe. So if we're really going to push forward on an effort that means something to all of us, I think that should be it. So yeah, in a healthcare profession, I'm assuming that there's this tedious line of what you can and cannot pass on to law enforcement or anybody for that matter. So if I was if I was a health professional, and I would be looking for a patient who doesn't appear to be allowed to make their own decision, his or her own decision, someone who might appear in front of you once with some bruising or something that you might feel like is an assaultive style wounds and bruises, but doesn't come back for follow-up when follow-up is necessary. Maybe that would be something that we might take note of. Any type of cigarette burns, any type of fresh branding, whether it be with a coat hanger, or even in some organizations there are brands made just like you would brand a cow, that they brand their women, their property, and stuff like that. Those would be the obvious here in the police department, that it's not the first, second, or third, or fourth encounter always that we really start making some progress with getting information. It's those multiple encounters that really lead us to start taking little nuggets of information, putting those together, and getting a better idea of what's going on. And I would just guess that it might be the same in the healthcare profession, where hopefully you get to see a patient a couple times, or maybe you're just going to get a few little things that can be passed on to law enforcement that we could put in our little toolbox and start putting the pieces of the puzzle together and making a little bit clearer picture.